The air in the Beaumont dining room was thick with lies. It was the humid August of 1852, and outside, the Mississippi night was a black velvet canvas pricked with the light of 1,000,000,000 stars. Inside, however, the only stars were the ones captured in the crystal goblets, where candlelight danced like trapped spirits. This was the world of the Beaumont family, a world built on cotton, cruelty, and the veneer of civility, a veneer as thin as ice over a deep, dark river. At the head of the table sat Judge Thaddeus Beaumont, a man who believed the world was his to command. Around him sat his wife, his 4 children, and their families. 12 souls in total, laughing, toasting, blissfully unaware that each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a footstep of a coming executioner. In the doorway that separated the heat of the kitchen from the gilded calm of the dining room, a woman stood watching. Her name was Eliza. To the Beaumonts, she was less than a ghost. She was furniture that moved, a pair of hands that prepared the succulent duck, that glazed the vegetables, that poured the wine. For 10 years, her presence in this house had been defined by her silence and her skill. They boasted of her cooking. They never once wondered about the soul of the woman who cooked it. They had forgotten she was a person, and that was a fatal mistake. Because Eliza was not just a cook. Tonight she was a chemist, she was a judge, and she was a mother. A sharp, searing memory cut through the present, a different kind of heat, the brutal sun of a New Orleans auction block, the sound of a gavel cracking like bone, the feel of her 2 daughters, Grace and Patience, their small hands torn from her grasp as they were sold to a different master, their cries swallowed by the uncaring crowd. The Beaumonts had bought her that day, but not her children. They had left that part of her soul to bleed out on the auction block. For 10 years that wound had never closed. Tonight she would cauterize it with fire and arsenic. The poison doesn't scream, it whispers. It had been her silent partner, collected over months. Rat poison, sold to her without a second glance because, of course, the big house had rats. The true rats, however, sat at the dining table. She had spent nights studying its properties, listening to the conversations of visiting doctors, learning its bitter language. She knew its chemistry intimately. How to weave it into a sauce so the richness of the wine masked its metallic tang. How to dissolve it in the cream for the vegetables. How to mix it with sugar and dust it over the magnificent birthday cake waiting in the kitchen. A sweet tomb for the man who had authored her suffering. "Grandmother, my tongue feels funny," piped up 7-year-old Thomas, the judge's grandson. Matilda Beaumont offered a condescending smile. "Hush now, child. It's just the spices. Eliza is a master of her craft." And in her heart, Eliza smiled. "I hope so, sweet boy. I hope so." From the doorway, Eliza watched. A master of her craft, soft indeed. The judge raised his glass, his face flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. "A toast," he boomed, "to the Beaumont legacy. May it stand for 1,000 years." The glasses clinked, a sound like tiny breaking promises, and as they drank, the whispers of the poison began to sing in their blood. It was 7:45 p.m. The great unraveling began not with a bang, but with a child's gasp. Young Thomas's eyes went wide, and a moment later he was violently ill, the contents of his stomach spewing across the pristine tablecloth. His mother lunged to help him, but a sharp, invisible claw seemed to seize her from within, and she crumpled to the floor. The judge, bellowing in confusion, tried to stand, but his legs refused to obey. His face, moments before a portrait of power, became a purple mask of terror as his own throat constricted. The dining room transformed from a sanctuary of order into a theater of chaos. It was a grotesque ballet of death. A son clutched his chest, his body convulsing. A daughter, known for her delicate beauty, clawed at her own face as if to tear away the poison blooming beneath her skin. The porcelain mask of the Beaumont dynasty was cracking, revealing the raw, ugly panic beneath. "Poison!" one of the sons managed to scream, his voice a strangled rasp. "My God, we've been poisoned!" Instantly, 12 sets of horrified eyes shot to the kitchen doorway, the source of every meal, the source of their doom. But the space was empty. The silent architect of their destruction had already melted back into the shadows of the house she knew better than they ever would. The screams grew louder, mingling with the crash of overturned chairs and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the floor. Matilda Beaumont, her elegant dress soiled, crawled on her hands and knees, her last breath used to shriek the name of her executioner into the uncaring night. "Eliza!" The sound was a raw, primal scream of betrayal echoing through the halls. But as the chaos reached its crescendo, a far more chilling drama was unfolding in the rest of the house. The 2 footmen on duty in the grand hall heard the screams. They looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them in a single glance, before one turned and slowly, deliberately, began to wind the grandfather clock. The housemaids in the laundry heard the commotion. They paused their folding, listened for a moment, and then continued their work. The stable boy saw Eliza slip out of the back door with a small, hastily packed bundle and stride purposefully towards the dark line of trees that marked the path to the river. He watched her go, then turned back to brushing down the judge's favorite horse. The revenge wasn't the act of one. It was the silence of 50. As the last of the Beaumonts choked on their final agonizing breaths, the enslaved people of the plantation stood as one, a silent, unmoving jury, and let the verdict be carried out.
By 8:15 p.m., the Beaumont dining room was no longer a place of celebration. It was a tomb. The grandfather clock, indifferent to the carnage, continued its steady metronomic count of the seconds. The scent of magnolias was now lost beneath the acrid, sour smell of death and fear. Judge Beaumont lay face down in his birthday cake, the once proud patriarch reduced to a grotesque centerpiece. 12 bodies, frozen in the final, desperate postures of their agony, littered the room like fallen statues. This was the true face of arsenic. It wasn't a gentle sleep, but a violent, convulsive dismantling of the human body. While the great house fell into a silence as deep as the grave it now contained, a different kind of life sparked in the slave quarters. In the oppressive darkness, a council of war was gathering. 47 souls, bound by a shared secret, faced a terrifying new reality. They had witnessed a judgment. Now, they had to survive the consequences. An old blacksmith named Samuel, a man whose hands were as strong as the iron he forged and whose spirit was even stronger, took charge. His voice was a low, steady rumble in the night. "She did it," he whispered, not with surprise, but with a grim finality. "Eliza did what we only ever dared to dream." "They'll hang us all," a young housemaid named Rose whimpered, her body trembling. "They'll say we were all in on it." "And weren't we?" countered a woman named Ruth, Eliza's closest friend and the head housemaid. Her eyes, usually soft, were now hard as flint. "We stood by. We let it happen. Our silence was our signature on her work. Now we must see it through." A hushed, frantic debate erupted. Burn the house down? Claim it was bandits? Each suggestion was more desperate than the last. But Ruth, her mind as sharp as Eliza's, had been prepared for this. Eliza had not acted alone, not truly. She had planted the seeds of this night for years. "No," Ruth said, her voice cutting through the panic. "We will tell a story, the right story." And in the flickering lamplight, she began to construct the fortress that would protect them all. It was a fortress built not of stone, but of carefully chosen lies. Meanwhile, Eliza moved through the swamp paths bordering the plantation. This was not a panicked flight, it was a strategic retreat. For 10 years, on the pretense of gathering herbs for the kitchen, she had walked these routes, memorizing every twist, every cypress knee that broke the dark water, every patch of solid ground. The swamp, a place of fear for her captors, was her sanctuary. It was a landscape that knew how to keep secrets. In a bundle tied with twine, she carried her new life. A change of clothes, a small pouch of coins stolen one by one over the years, and a set of forged papers. The papers identified her as a free woman named Sarah Jones, a seamstress traveling to visit family. Eliza had taught herself to read and write in absolute secrecy, practicing the letters by tracing them in flour on the kitchen cable in the dead of night. Literacy was a hanging offense, but Eliza knew it was also the key to her survival. The signature on her papers was a flawless imitation of a man she had never met, copied from a bill of sale she had found in the judge's study. Back at the plantation, as the first hint of dawn threatened the eastern sky, the performance began. It was Jupiter, a young field hand, who was chosen to discover the tragedy. He ran from the great house, his face a perfect mask of horror, his screams shattering the morning calm. Sickness," he cried, running toward the quarters. "A terrible sickness has taken them all." The other enslaved staff rushed toward the house, their movements a carefully choreographed dance of panic and grief. They burst into the dining room and recoiled in shock. Ruth, her own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, let out a piercing wail that was utterly convincing. By 7 a.m., Jupiter was on horseback, riding hard for the neighboring plantation with the news. The story was set. The Beaumont family had taken ill during dinner. The servants, despite their heroic efforts, could not save them. It appeared to be a case of tainted food, a tragic accident. There was no mention of Eliza. The official story, the one they would all live or die by, was that their head cook had been sold to a different plantation in Georgia 2 weeks ago. To prove it, Ruth clutched a brilliantly forged bill of sale, the ink still smelling faintly of the coffee she had used to age the paper. Sheriff William Donovan arrived at 9:43 a.m. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity and had learned to trust no one. He was followed by the county coroner, Dr. Marcus Webb, a man of science in a land governed by superstition. As Sheriff Donovan stepped across the threshold of the Beaumont house, he was met with a scene of orchestrated sorrow. Servants wept over the bodies of their masters. Ruth, her eyes red from the onion she had rubbed on them moments before, recounted the tragic tale. "It happened so fast, Sheriff," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "One moment, we were hearing them laugh. The next," she gestured a shaking hand toward the dining room, unable to finish. Donovan listened, his expression unreadable. He walked through the house, his boots echoing on the polished floors. He noted the half-eaten food, the overturned chairs, the expressions of horror frozen on the dead faces. He was a hunter, and the air in this house felt wrong. It was too clean, too orderly for such a chaotic event. There was no scent of sickness, only the faint, lingering smell of death, and something else. Something that smelled like a lie. He turned his attention from the bodies to the living. He walked over to Ruth, who stood surrounded by the other household staff, all of them a portrait of collective grief. He looked past her crocodile tears, past the trembling lips, and stared directly into her eyes. He saw the grief she was performing, but beneath it, he saw something else. A flicker of defiance, a glint of unbreakable resolve. The silence of the other servants was too perfect, their stories too aligned. "Tell me again," Sheriff Donovan said, his voice dangerously soft as he stood inches from Ruth's face. "Tell me about the cook who was sold to Georgia." The fortress of lies was about to face its first assault. The sheriff's cold, calculating eyes met Ruth, and in the silent, opulent hall of the dead, a new war began.
The interrogation was a siege. For 2 days, Sheriff Donovan and his men laid waste to the Beaumont plantation, not with fire, but with questions. They questioned every man, woman, and child, separating them, threatening them, trying to find a single crack in the wall of their story. But the fortress Ruth had built held strong. The narrative was a rock. Eliza had been sold. The family got sick. We tried to help. Over and over, the same story, told with the same tearful, convincing grief. Donovan was a bulldog. He knew he was being lied to. He could feel it in his bones. But lies, when told by everyone, start to take on the weight of truth. His frustration grew with every dead end. The break came not from a confession, but from science. In the kitchen, which had been scrubbed clean with a frantic, meticulous energy, Dr. Webb made a discovery. He was not a man swayed by tears or threats. He believed in evidence. While the sheriff saw a spotless room, the coroner saw a room that was too spotless. He ran his finger along the bottom of a heavy flour sack, a place a hasty cleaning might miss. His fingers came back with a faint, whitish residue. He tasted a minuscule amount. The telltale garlic-like bitterness confirmed it. Arsenic. But it was his second discovery that shattered the conspirators' alibi. On the floor, near the back door leading out toward the swamp, he found a single crushed leaf. It was not a common kitchen herb. Webb, a keen amateur botanist, recognized it instantly. It was a leaf from a ghost orchid, a rare flower that grew only in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the cypress swamp. It was a place no one would go unless they knew the paths intimately, unless they were using the swamp as an escape route. The cook they sold to Georgia, Webb said that evening to Donovan, his voice low and certain, took the scenic route, through the swamp. Hundreds of miles north, Eliza, now Sarah Jones, was a passenger on a different kind of railroad. The Underground Railroad was not a thing of steam and iron, but of whispered passwords, hidden compartments, and the breathtaking courage of strangers.
In a small Quaker farmhouse in Ohio, she was hidden in a secret cellar, listening to the quiet footsteps of the family above who were risking their own lives for hers. Freedom, she was learning, was not a place you arrived at, but 1,000 tiny acts of defiance passed from one hand to the next. One night, the farmhouse was raided. Slave catchers, acting on a tip, tore the house apart. Eliza held her breath in the pitch-black cellar, her hand clutching a small vial of arsenic she had saved. One final dose. For herself, in case of capture. She could hear the heavy boots just above her head, the angry, frustrated shouts of the men. But the Quaker farmer and his wife were as solid as old oaks. They knew nothing, they said. They had seen no one. The searchers eventually left empty-handed, and in the silence that followed, Eliza understood the incredible, terrifying power of a community united in a single, righteous lie. Back in Mississippi, armed with Webb's evidence, Donovan launched his final assault. He gathered Ruth and Samuel in the dining room, the ghosts of the Beaumonts, their silent audience. He slammed the ghost orchid leaf down on the polished table. This was found by the back door. The same back door your stable boy now remembers seeing Eliza leave through on the night of the murders. The story is over.
Ruth looked at the leaf. She saw the trap closing. The fortress was about to be breached. Samuel, beside her, seemed to shrink, the iron in his spirit finally beginning to bend. They could all hang for this. Conspiracy to commit murder. The penalty was absolute. But Eliza had taught Ruth more than just how to read. She had taught her how to think. In that moment, Ruth made a decision. She would not let the fortress crumble. She would simply give the sheriff a different room to explore. Her face crumpled, but this time the tears were part of a new, more brilliant performance. "You're right, Sheriff," she sobbed, falling to her knees. "I couldn't bear to tell you the whole truth. We were afraid." Donovan paused, intrigued. "Afraid of what?" "Of Eliza," Ruth whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of terror. "She'd been acting strangely for weeks, ever since the judge sold her girls, mumbling to herself. We all saw it. That night she wasn't herself. She did it in a fit of madness. When we realized what she'd done, she threatened us, said she'd poison our children too if we didn't help her escape. We were just poor, frightened slaves. What could we do? We lied because we were scared for our lives." It was a masterful stroke. It confirmed Donovan's suspicions, gave him his murderer, and explained the cover-up, all while painting the others not as conspirators, but as victims. It was a lie that sacrificed one to save 46. The official investigation closed. A massive manhunt was launched for the mad cook, Eliza, but it was a ghost hunt. There was no trail to follow. The state of Mississippi seized the Beaumont estate, and the 47 enslaved people were sold off to different plantations, their conspiracy broken apart by the cold, unfeeling logic of the market. The silence was kept. But the story of Eliza did not end. It became a legend, a whispered tale told in the slave quarters of plantations across the South. They said she had wings and had flown away. They said she had turned into a ghost and haunted the swamps. They said that on humid August nights, you could still smell arsenic on the wind. Eliza, the woman, vanished into the vast, anonymous promise of the North. She may have found her daughters. She may have found a new life. History does not record her fate, but her actions left an echo. In the years that followed, a new and terrible fear took root in the hearts of slave owners.
They would look at their cooks, their maids, their footmen, and for the first time, they would wonder what thoughts were hiding behind the silent, obedient masks. The balance of power had not shifted, not yet, but a seed had been planted, a seed of fear, a seed of possibility. And it all started in a gilded dining room where a woman named Eliza had decided that if justice was not on the menu, she would serve revenge instead. The poison was never just in the food, it was in the silence that followed.